She was 20 years old. She was ranked number 42 in the world. She had never won a Grand Slam. And on a Tuesday afternoon in Paris, in front of every major tennis journalist on the planet, she said the one thing the WTA never expected anyone to say out loud. What happened next broke the internet in less than 3 hours. But before we get there, you need to understand something. This moment didn't come from nowhere. It didn't arrive because one young player got emotional in front of a camera. This explosion, this 30 million view, globally trending, governing body-shaking explosion, had been building for over a year. And the people at the very top of women's tennis knew it was coming. They just never thought it would come from her. So who is Eala? And why did the most powerful organization in women's tennis suddenly find itself scrambling to respond to a 20-year-old from Manila who had never even made it past the third round of a Grand Slam? To understand that, you have to go back to Rome. You have to go back to the moment the entire player community decided enough was enough, and the moment one young woman decided that a signature on a joint statement wasn't going to be enough for her. It was May 4, 2026. The Foro Italico in Rome, home of the Italian Open, was doing what it always does in the days before the tournament begins, buzzing with controlled chaos. Practice sessions bleeding into media obligations. Equipment bags rolling across clay courts. Players stretching in the morning sun, trying to find that last fraction of sharpness before the French Open window opens. On the surface, everything looked normal. But in the players' lounge, something was happening that had never happened quite like this before. 20 players had gathered. Not 20 random players. 20 of the most recognizable names in global tennis. Aryna Sabalenka, the world number 1. Coco Gauff. Iga Swiatek. Carlos Alcaraz. The list read like a who's who of everyone you'd want watching your sport grow. And they weren't there for a team dinner or a sponsor obligation. They were there because they were furious. And they had the numbers to prove exactly why. The document they released that afternoon was not a complaint. It wasn't a cry for sympathy. It was a warning delivered with surgical precision, and the tennis world had never seen anything quite like it. Players' share of Roland Garros tournament revenue has declined from 15.5% in 2024 to a projected 14.9% in 2026. Those words, calm and factual on the surface, landed like thunder across every press outlet in sport. Now here's where it gets really interesting. Because on the surface, the French Open had actually announced a prize money increase. The total pot had been raised to 61.7 million euros, a 9.5% jump. That sounds generous. That sounds like progress. But what did the actual math show? Roland Garros had generated 395 million euros in revenue in 2025 alone, a 14% year-on-year increase. The tournament was booming. The broadcast deals were ballooning. The sponsorships were shattering records. And out of all that extraordinary growth, prize money for the players went up by just 5.4%. That's not a raise. That's the pay cut disguised in a press release. The players' actual share of the revenue pie had dropped to 14.3%. And while that number was shrinking, the Grand Slams themselves were doing something else entirely. But what most people still didn't know, what wasn't in the headlines yet, was that the players had already tried to fix this quietly. In March 2025, more than a year before this press conference, the players had sent a formal letter to all 4 Grand Slam organizations. They had asked for better representation in decision-making. They had asked for contributions toward player welfare, pensions, long-term healthcare, the basic dignity of knowing that the sport you've dedicated your life to will take care of you when your knees give out and the wins stop coming. The response they received? Nothing. Silence. The kind of institutional silence that says, very clearly, we don't think you're serious enough to answer. And that was the moment something shifted. Aryna Sabalenka, never one to soften her words, said what everyone else was only thinking. Without us, there wouldn't be a tournament, she told journalists in Rome, her voice steady and unambiguous. I feel like we definitely deserve to be paid more. At some point we will boycott. I feel like that's going to be the only way to fight for our rights. The word boycott hit the tennis world like a grenade. A unified player revolt. A potential walkout at the most prestigious clay court event on earth. Suddenly, this wasn't just a financial dispute. It was a crisis. But here is what nobody was paying attention to in Rome. One player had been watching all of this unfold from a distance. She had read the joint statement. She had been asked to sign it. And she had said no, not because she disagreed with it, but because she believed she had something far more powerful than her signature. She had a story that the numbers couldn't fully capture. And she was going to tell it. Just not yet. Fast forward to May 23, 2026. Paris. The Roland Garros Media Center. 2 o'clock in the afternoon. The French Open is underway, the clay courts are packed, and somewhere between the match results and the training schedules, the WTA has released a statement. You've probably seen this kind of statement before. Carefully worded. Diplomatically evasive. The kind of language designed to acknowledge without admitting, to engage without committing, to say everything while changing nothing. We have heard the concerns of our players, the WTA wrote, and remain committed to the welfare of all athletes. The players had heard versions of this sentence for 2 years. They knew exactly what it meant. It meant nothing was going to change. The press conference that afternoon had been billed as routine. A young player talking about her French Open preparation. Journalists showed up expecting to hear about match strategy, about clay court adjustments, about the challenges of competing at the second Grand Slam of the year. Some of them were barely paying attention when Eala sat down at the microphone. She was 20 years old. She was ranked 42 in the world. She was from the Philippines, a country that had sent its heart and soul to cheer for her every time she stepped on a court. She was, by any conventional measure, not the person you'd expect to become the loudest voice in professional tennis on a Tuesday afternoon in Paris. What nobody in that room realized, yet, was that they were about to watch history. She didn't read from a script. She didn't look at notes. She didn't do what players usually do in these moments, which is to say something careful enough to avoid controversy while still sounding principled. She looked directly into the cameras. And she began to speak. I used to think that representing the Philippines was the greatest pressure I would ever face. She paused. Let it land. I was wrong. The room didn't go quiet. It went still. There's a difference. Quiet is just the absence of sound. Still is when everyone in a space stops breathing at the same time because they sense, instinctively, that something real is about to happen. The greatest pressure, she continued, is not the flags. It's not the rankings. It's knowing that the sport I love, the sport that has given me everything, is failing the very people who make it possible. And then she said something that no press release, no joint statement, no carefully worded diplomatic communique had managed to say. She made it personal. I came to Rome ranked 42 in the world. I pushed the number 2 player on earth to her absolute limit. And when it was over, when the match was done, when the crowd went home, when the cameras stopped rolling, I earned €46,880. Plus, the cost of a full season of coaching and travel. She let that number sit in the room. For players outside the top 50, the math doesn't work. We lose money just by showing up. Here's the thing about that number that you need to understand, because it changes everything. The French Open had announced its prize money increase like it was a gift. Like the players should be grateful. €61.7 million total. The biggest prize pool in the tournament's history. But what Eala was describing, €46,880 for a player ranked in the 40s, one of the most visible and popular players in the sport, exposed exactly what those headline numbers were hiding. The money wasn't going to the players who filled the stadiums. It wasn't going to the athletes who made the flags wave and the chants thunder and the broadcast numbers climb. It was going somewhere else. And the gap between the stated generosity and the lived reality was growing wider every single year. And yet, she said, her voice hardening in a way that made journalists unconsciously sit up straighter, when I walk onto the court, the stadiums are full. The flags are waving. The chants are deafening. The fans don't come because of my ranking. They come because they believe in me. Because they see themselves in me. Because what this means to the Philippines has never been about me. It's about them. She stopped. Just for a moment. The kind of pause that tells you the next sentence is the one that matters. So when the WTA tells us they remain committed to player welfare, I have one question. Committed how? Committed when? Her eyes didn't waver. Revenue up 14%. Prize money up 5.4%. Our share down to 14.3%. The Grand Slams are making more money than they have ever made in history. And we are being asked to be grateful. And then she looked directly into the camera. Not at the journalists. Not at the room. Into the lens. Into the audience watching at home. And she said the 4 words that would be clipped, captioned, and shared 30 million times in the next 24 hours. I'm not grateful. I'm angry. She raised her hand before the room could erupt. I have one more thing to say. Not to the media. To the WTA. She leaned into the microphone. The entire room leaned with her. The numbers don't lie. And neither will I. You want to talk about constructive dialogue? Stop talking. Start paying. She stood up, nodded once to the room, and walked out. The press conference had lasted less than 10 minutes. But nothing about professional tennis would be exactly the same after it. Now here's where the story gets even bigger. Because what happened in the hours after Eala walked out of that media center was not a slow, gradual build. It was a detonation. The journalists filed out with their fingers already moving across their phones. The clip had been shot. It was already being trimmed, already being captioned, already finding its way onto every platform simultaneously. By 3:30 p.m., 5 million people had watched it. By 5 o'clock, that number had crossed 30 million. The hashtags, Stop Talking Start Paying, The Numbers Don't Lie, were trending not just in the tennis community. They were trending everywhere. But why did this clip, in particular, hit that hard? There have been player complaints before. There have been statements and press releases and carefully worded criticisms from far more decorated athletes. What was it about a 20-year-old from Manila, ranked 42 in the world, that made 30 million people stop scrolling? The answer is something that no communications team can manufacture and no PR strategy can replicate. It's the specific combination of truth, specificity, and fearlessness. She didn't speak in abstractions. She gave a number. 46,880 euros. She gave a percentage. 14.3%. She gave a timeline. A letter sent in March 2025. A year of silence in response. She didn't say the system was unfair. She proved it, sentence by sentence, in under 10 minutes, on camera, without notes, at 20 years old. And then she walked away. The locker room reacted immediately and without hesitation. Coco Gauff, who had been among the first players to sign the original joint statement, posted a message that cut through every other piece of noise that day. She said what needed to be said. Not in a statement. Not in a press release. In front of the cameras. In front of the world. That's courage. 6 words from Coco Gauff. Reshared hundreds of thousands of times. Aryna Sabalenka, who had been the first to say the word boycott out loud, offered something more personal. I've been saying this for months. But Alex said it better. She said it louder. And she said it with the flags of her people behind her. That's power. Iga Swiatek, measured and careful in her public statements, didn't measure her words this time. It's brave. It's honest. It's what we've all been feeling but haven't been able to say. She's not afraid. And that's why people listen to her. And then Naomi Osaka weighed in from her hotel room with the kind of clarity that only comes from someone who has already paid a price for speaking the truth. The system is broken. It's been broken for a long time. Players like Alex are the ones who are going to fix it. Not the administrators. Not the sponsors. The players. And finally, from the ATP side, Novak Djokovic, who had spent years fighting parallel battles over player representation and governance, offered 7 words that told you everything about the weight of what had just happened. The numbers don't lie. The players deserve better. Every single one of these responses posted within hours of the press conference. Every single one amplified the clip further. Every single one told the WTA the same thing. This time is different. And the WTA's response? That is where the story takes its final, devastating turn. Because what the governing body of women's tennis said that evening, after hours of scrambling, after watching the clip reach 30 million views, after seeing the world's greatest players line up behind a 20-year-old from the Philippines, was this: the WTA takes all player concerns seriously. We have reached out to Miss Eala's representatives to schedule a meeting to discuss her concerns in a constructive manner. A meeting? After a year of silence. After a letter that went unanswered for 12 months. After the share of tournament revenue dropped from 15.5% to 14.3%. After players were losing money just by showing up. The WTA's answer was a meeting. The public response was immediate and devastating. The hashtag the WTA had accidentally helped create, Stop Talking Start Paying, trended for 3 consecutive days. Journalists who had covered tennis for decades wrote that they had never seen a governing body lose the narrative so completely, so quickly, so publicly. Former players who had never said a word about prize money disputes were suddenly giving interviews. Former champions who had accepted the system because the system had worked for them were suddenly questioning whether it had ever been truly fair at all. But here is the part of this story that the headlines didn't capture. The part that happened after the cameras stopped rolling and the trending topics slowed down and the hotel corridors emptied out. Late that night, Eala sat in her hotel room in Paris. Her phone was still buzzing, hundreds of messages, thousands of notifications, languages she didn't even recognize. She was a 20-year-old who had come to Paris to play tennis, who had practiced her backhand and studied her opponents and tried to sleep properly and eat right and do everything a professional athlete is supposed to do in the week before a Grand Slam. And instead she had become, in the space of 10 minutes, the most talked about person in her sport. Her mother was beside her. Because that's where mothers are when the world gets loud and complicated and scary. And Alex looked at her and asked the question that every young person asks when they've done something irreversible for the right reasons. Mama, do you think they'll listen? Her mother took her hand. And she said the only thing a mother can say when her child has just been braver than they ever planned to be. They have no choice, and you gave them one. That exchange didn't trend. It wasn't in the headlines. But it might be the most important part of this entire story, because it tells you something about what this moment actually cost. Not for the organization. Not for the players at the top of the rankings who could afford to speak freely because their contracts were already signed and their endorsements were already secured. It tells you what it cost a 20-year-old who had €46,880 and a ranking of 42 and a whole career still left to play in a system that now knew her name in a way it hadn't before. She had done something that the sport's most powerful voices had not managed to do in years of meetings and statements and carefully curated social media posts. She had made the abstract concrete. She had made the financial political and the political personal. She had taken a spreadsheet full of percentages and turned it into a human story. And in doing so, she had forced a conversation that the people at the top of tennis had spent a decade trying to keep quiet. Now here's the question that no one has fully answered yet. What happens next? The French Open continued. The matches were played. The trophies were lifted. The clay courts dried in the Paris afternoon sun and the photographers captured all the beauty and drama that makes this tournament one of the greatest sporting events on earth. None of that stopped. But something underneath it had shifted. The players who had whispered their frustrations in locker rooms for years now had a reference point. A 20-year-old had stood in front of the cameras with no notes, no lawyer, no safety net, and told the truth. If she could do it, what was stopping anyone else? The fans who had watched their favorite players burn out, break down, retire early, and disappear from the sport without explanation now had a framework for understanding why. The math didn't work. It hadn't worked for years. And the organizations that benefited most from the sport's extraordinary growth had been quietly content to let the athletes absorb the cost of that imbalance while the revenue numbers climbed to new records every year. Revenue up 14%. Prize money up 5.4%. Players' share down to 14.3%. The numbers don't lie. Those words are going to outlast the 2026 French Open. They're going to outlast the next joint statement, the next meeting, the next carefully worded press release from a governing body trying to manage a narrative that has already escaped. They are going to become the language that a generation of professional tennis players uses when they talk about what this era meant. When they talk about the moment the conversation stopped being polite and started being real. Because here's what Eala actually did that afternoon in Paris, and this is the part one want you to sit with. She didn't just criticize the WTA. She redefined who gets to speak. For decades, the loudest voices in tennis governance have belonged to administrators, organizers, tournament directors, people who negotiate on behalf of the sport but don't actually play it. The players have been stakeholders, yes, consulted, sometimes. But ultimately, the decisions have been made in rooms they weren't allowed into. Eala walked into a press room, the only room she had access to, and made it the most important room in tennis for exactly 10 minutes. She didn't have a lawyer present. She didn't have a communications team. She didn't have the leverage of a Grand Slam title or a world #1 ranking or a decade of brand equity to protect herself with. She had a microphone and the truth and 20 years of watching what this sport does to the people who love it enough to sacrifice everything for it. And she used all three of them with a precision and a courage that left an entire industry without a response. The question that lingers now, the one that will define what this moment actually meant, isn't whether the WTA will eventually improve prize money distributions. They will, at some point, because the alternative is watching the sport's credibility collapse under the weight of its own contradictions. The question isn't whether the Grand Slams will eventually establish pension programs and long-term healthcare contributions. They will, because the players who are building the case for those programs are not going away. The real question is simpler than any of that. When the changes finally come, when the percentages shift and the welfare programs launch and the governance structures open up to include actual player representation, will the people in those negotiating rooms remember the pressure from the top? Will they remember the carefully crafted joint statements from established champions? Or will they remember a 20-year-old from Manila who walked into a press room on a Tuesday afternoon with nothing but the truth and changed the conversation permanently? I think you already know the answer. The numbers don't lie. And neither will she. If this story hit you differently than you expected, leave your thoughts in the comments, because the conversation Eala started is still going. Subscribe to Court Legacy for more stories that go deeper than the scoreline, deeper than the rankings, deeper than anything the official press releases are willing to tell you. Because sometimes the most important moments in sport happen not on the court, but in the 10 minutes before someone walks out of a room and doesn't look back.